Hi everyone, my name is Zuhaib. In this tutorial, I will show you how the precomping function works for grid and other layers and compositions, and will discuss all the settings inside precomp settings dialog. It will create separate compositions for all selected items or layers. You can also precomp an existing grids items. You can precomp text and shape layers, compositions, video footages, images, solid layers and other items with a valid video source. When you run the precomp function, it will create a separate folder in the project panel inside the sgcomps folder with a unique ID to keep the project organized. So now let's start with precomp dialog settings. I have opened this project with a grid and some other layers to show how precomping works for these. The first option is get sizes from, and here we can choose the size of precomps for each individual item. If we select items, then each precomp will have the exact size as its item and will fit in properly. I could have used all these items, but to show things more clearly, I have just selected some of these including text, shapes, images and video layers. I undo it. If we select active comp, then all the new precomps will use the current composition size. In case selected items have different sizes than the active composition, then they will get cropped or introduce gaps due to the size differences. But you can use any fitting option to fit these that we will discuss later. You may notice that all precomps now have the active composition size, but it is different than what precomp function does in After Effects, as we have all items centered inside their compositions. Let's undo again to test the next option. If we choose custom, then we can give a custom size to all precomps. Let's say we type 1080 by 1080, and when we click create precomps, then all will have this exact size. You can verify by going to any of these composition and you can see it is 1080 by 1080. I undo it again. We can also add margins to the new compositions around the items. It will add to the overall size of precomps that will introduce margins around them. For example, let's add 50 pixels margins on all sides and create precomps again. Let's check again by going inside. You can see it added 100 pixels horizontally and 100 pixels vertically by adding to the composition size. Before it was 1080 and now it is 1180. I undo the operation and I am disabling the margins for now. Next we have fitting options to compensate for the size differences of items and their new precomps. So no matter what size we have selected for the precomps, we can fit the items to these easily using these fitting options. Fitting options will only show in active comp or custom size options. As if we choose items option, then the compositions already have exact sizes as their items, so no fitting is required. The first one is fill the comp, which will fill the entire composition by resizing the items proportionally. I am changing the custom size to 500 by 500 pixels. Let's activate fill the comp and click on create precomps button again. You can see all the new precomps have the same sizes and the items have scaled proportionally to cover or fill the composition area. It can scale on both sides horizontally or vertically. If I go inside the text layer, then you can see here the text is scaled and the top and bottom edges are touching the composition because the width was bigger, so it is cropped outside. The same has happened with all these other items. I undo it again. Fit to comp will fit the items inside the composition boundaries by scaling them proportionally. Let's create precomps now. You can see it is fitting the inside edge of the composition, and also as the width and height of the item were not proportionally equal to the composition's width and height, so it has introduced some empty area here. Let's undo it again. The next option is fit by width, which will fit the items by their widths and will scale the height proportionally. You can see here. I undo it again. Then we have fit by height. It will fit the items by their heights to the composition height and will adjust their widths proportionally. like so. Then we have stretch to fit, that will stretch the items horizontally and vertically to fit perfectly to the composition's width and height, and it won't maintain any proportions. You can see here how these all items have stretched to fit their compositions. The last one is reset original scale, which will create precomps using a given size and will reset the scale of all items to 100 in case it was changed, and will remove any scale keyframes if existed. If I open the scale property of these items, you can see their scales are changed for most of the items. Let's focus on the second layer's property, which is 25.7. So now if I precomp these items and check by going inside the second item, you can see it has scale of 100 now. I undo it again. These fitting options will not cover the margins area we have defined above, as margins are calculated separately from the composition size. So let's say we give a composition size of 1000 by 1000 and add 50 pixels margins on each side. Now if we select any fitting option, let's select stretch. Then it will get stretched to fit the composition size exactly, but will have additional margins around these items. If I go inside the text layer, you can see here the composition size is now 1100 by 1100, but the item is fitting to 1000 by 1000 size that we used for the composition. If we add a guide to verify, you can see it is exactly 50 pixels gap here. Let's undo it and continue to the next section. I'm also deactivating this fitting option for now. The next section is get settings from, where we can choose how to set duration, frame rate and pixel aspect ratio for the new precomps. If we choose items, then it will get these settings from all individual items. But as some layer types like text, shape and some others don't have all these options, so we can set here from where to get these missing settings in get missing settings from drop down menu. For example, if a shape layer doesn't have any frame rate value, then it will get it from the active composition or from the last saved custom value based on our selection here. Let's set it back to items and get missing settings from the active composition and create precomps now. Let's undo and select the other layers as well. You can see here it sets the duration according to the layers in and out points here. Also for the text and shape layers which don't have any frame duration or aspect ratio values, so it got these from this active composition that we have set here. If we choose active comp, then it will use the duration, frame rate and aspect ratio of the currently active composition for all these items. You can see these values here, and you can refresh these values by this button in case you jump to any other composition. This is just to view the settings of the current composition and nothing to worry about, as when you click create precomp button from here or on the main UI, it will always get new values of the current active composition. So it is not necessary to refresh these. Then the last one is custom, where we can set all these settings manually. You can put value in the duration field in seconds. Let's type 10 here for 10 seconds duration. Then in the frame rate field we can type the frame rate we want. I type 24 here. Then in the pixel aspect ratio field we can type 1 for the scale aspect ratio. This can be a fractional value using a point for different aspect ratios like 1.5, 2.5, etc. So if we precomp items now, you can see these all have the same 10 seconds durations and other settings as provided here. I undo that and change it back to items. The next option is attributes, which works similarly to how the attribute option works when we precomp any layer in After Effects. The leave all will leave all attributes of the items outside. But as for some layer types, for example for text and shape layers, we cannot select this option while precomping in After Effects. But here we can still use this, and what it actually does is try to fake it by copying all transformation data and some switch states from these layers and will apply on the new precomps later. For example, I have some position keyframes on this text layer and also moved its anchor point. So if we precomp items now, you can see it still has the position keyframes and anchor point at the same place, but the text layer is moved inside the composition. Then we have move all attributes, and it works the same as in After Effects for all layer types. The only difference is it will always keep the layer in the center without shifting its position outside, as that is convenient while pre-comping individual layers. So if we try now, you will see the layers in the center of their composition but without changing the positions outside. Even this layer with position keyframes is centered at the current active time along with its keyframes, and now if you move through the time, then it will shift due to the position changes by its keyframes inside. The next option is ignore precomped items that will not precomp already precomped items, or in other words composition items. Then we have add background layer that we can use to add a background layer inside each precomp. We can set its color here. The margin option will not affect the background size, and the background will always cover the whole composition including the margins. If I enable background, add 50 pixels margins on each side, set the size to 500 and set the fitting option to stretch. Now if I create precomps, you can see all the items are stretched to fit the composition size without its margins, but the backgrounds are covering the margins as well. So if you go inside this image composition, you can see here the margins and a background layer behind everything. You can change the background color later as well with the update precomp function, which we will discuss shortly. I am undoing it and disabling the margins. The next and last option is selection from, where we can define from which panel to use selected items to precomp, from the project or layers panel. If you select project panel, then it will precomp selected project panel items and will add those to the active composition for your convenience while keeping those selected. Let's set get sizes from to items and click create precomps. You can see here as we have enabled background, but as these items don't have transparent pixels, so it is hidden behind these items. We could also enable margins that will add additional margins around the items, and the background will show through these. I undo it again and enable the margins and precomp again. As you can see now the background here as well. So now we have covered all the options of Precomp dialog, but we can also update existing precomps or composition items. For that purpose, I'm going to precomp these items again with selected settings, but from the layers panel items. Set custom size for these of 500 pixels. Now click on create precomp button. So it created precomps with 600 pixel sizes after including margins, and if you go inside and check, you can see background layers are added with the exact sizes as their compositions. So let's say we want to change the sizes of these compositions and the background color as well. We can change their sizes including margins and settings, which include duration, frame rate, pixel aspect ratio and the background layer with its color. But not the fitting options because we don't have any item selected this time. Let's say we want to change the composition size to 1000. Change duration to 30 seconds and set background color to something like blue. Now select the precomps you want to update and click on create precomps button while holding the control or command key. That will use its second function, which is update precomps. You can see now all compositions have 30 seconds duration, and if you go inside and check the size, so it has the new size of 1100 by 1100, including 50 pixels margins on each side, and also the background shape layer has the exact size as the new composition size. and updated its color as well. The background layer will be updated only if it is the last layer in the composition. If its position is changed or no background layer existed before, then when we update this composition, it will add a new background layer in that composition at the last position. I open now the grid composition. Precomping existing grid items is also very simple and it will take care of all of their controllers and expressions. You can select these individual grid item layers with or without any feature layers. Or you can also select the whole grid and it will detect the grid items by ignoring controllers and feature layers automatically. To demonstrate that, we select the whole grid by using Select Whole Grid button in Additional Utilities dialog or by selecting these manually. You can see all grid layers are selected. For this grid, I already have some precomped items and I don't want to further precompose these. So I'm enabling Ignore Precomped Items. This way these will be ignored. I would also recommend not to use margins, fitting options and background from this precomped dialog to apply on the grid layers, as the grid itself has these options in its controller, so it may confuse you later unless you are doing it intentionally. And also use sizes of the items or fit those to the compositions properly to avoid any gaps. So now if I click on Create PRECOMPS button, you can see only the grid items have been precomped with these precomped dialog settings. You can find these precompts in the project panel inside the selected grid ID folder. One small tip, if you hold the Alt or Option key and click on Create Precomp or Update Precomp button, then it will perform the action and will close the dialog. You can also use the Precomp button on the main UI and it will use the settings you have saved inside the Precomp settings dialog. If you precomp a shape layer with shape modifiers including bulge, trim paths or any other from this menu, then these will also be taken into account while calculating the overall shape size for the precomp. To demonstrate that, I have added a repeater in this shape layer and added keyframes to change their position. I also added a twist modifier with keyframes. I am setting to get the size from items to calculate exact item size and resetting some of these options to simplify the process. So if we precomp this shape at this point in time, then you can see it used its current affected size by the shape modifiers. The same works for the text layer with text animators applied. For example, this text layer has an animator with the position property animated in Y direction. If we precomp this at this time, you can see it used the exact size according to the current time. So guys, that was it for this tutorial and I hope this was helpful. You can reach out for any further queries or help. Thanks for watching and see you later.